You know, for a game where you're supposed to be cruising around space blasting enemies to dust, you'd think the first mission would involve, oh, I don't know, flying your spaceship. Instead, you get to man a stationary turret against an endless onslaught of asteroids. Just marvelous. Yep, it's white towel time again, since before we talk about today's Ancient DOS game, I want to relate the story of how I even know about it. Now, here we have the December 1996 issue of PC Gamer magazine. Now, this is one of the thickest issues of PC Gamer ever published, topping out at 444 pages. So as you can imagine, there's so much stuff in here that every time I take a look through, I always spot something I never noticed before. One day a long while back, roughly around the turn of the century, I was browsing through this issue just for the heck of it and decided to look through all the small ads way at the back of the issue. Normally these ads are done in just one or two colors and are for things like distributors, game-related schooling, adult-oriented software, stuff like that. However, one of the ads at the back really caught my eye because first of all, it was in color, but second of all, it looked like it was for a game, which would be really unusual considering all the game ads in these magazines would be full-page or half-page ads. But sure enough, here was a tiny advertisement for a game called StarQuest 1 in the 27th Century. So I went to the website, downloaded the shareware version, gave it a playthrough, and it was okay, but geez, the quality was just not consistent in the slightest. Still, I always figured it'd be neat to see the full game, and earlier this year I managed to pick up a copy of it. So is the full version any better than the shareware version? No. I mean, it's not that it's a bad game, it's just very unpolished and has some questionable bugs. It's a below average game, let's put it that way, but you could certainly do worse. In any case, before we get into more details, let's actually get into the gameplay. StarQuest 1 was developed by Virtual Adventures and published by Software Solutions around the end of 1995. It's a one-player first-person space shooter featuring support for VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, PC speaker and Sound Blaster sound effects, and general MIDI and ad-lib music. The ad-lib music support is incidental though, and you access it by selecting Sound Blaster as your music device. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and finding a copy can be challenging, but don't expect to pay more than $10 if you do. That said, the Virtual Adventures website surprisingly still exists, but hasn't been updated since 2004, so I don't have a clue if they still actively sell this game or not. Granted, there's still a download of the shareware version, so if you feel like trying the game out, you can still get it from www.virtuadv.com. The story this game has is both surprisingly elaborate and surprisingly pointless, so I'm just going to give you the gist of it. Sometime during the 23rd century, there was a galactic war between a race of beings known as the Centurions and virtually every other humanoid race known to exist. Following this war, most of the Centurions were wiped out and things became peaceful, boring, and dull. With the advent of teleportation technology, space travel itself started to become a lost cause, with most people just teleporting wherever they wanted to go. Fast forward to the 27th century, where the police forces of the galaxy have started to run into more and more attacks by unmanned drone space fighters, believed to be built by whatever Centurions were still remaining. And due to this new danger, space travel has become an adventure unto itself, with various people, bored of their peaceful lives, leaving everything behind to once again sail the stars. Thus you play the role of such a person who has sold all of his possessions in exchange for a brand new stochastic space cruiser. Now, before I start talking about the gameplay itself, I need to talk about actually getting this thing up and running, because there's a couple major issues that always come up for new players. Firstly, the game has a tendency to delete its own mission files. I mean, seriously, you boot the game up, make a new profile, set up your configuration, go to play a mission, get a file not found error telling you to reinstall the game, and then get dropped back to DOS. Fun, huh? Whether this is some form of copy protection going strange or just a major file handling bug, I don't know. But to get around these file deletions, what you gotta do is make an ISO of the CD itself, mount it in DOSBox, and then install the game from the CD image, telling the installer to run the game off of the CD. This way, the mission files are only ever read off of the CD image itself, which is read-only, so they'll never get deleted. The other major problem you'll run into immediately is the controls. And you have three control options: keyboard, mouse, and joystick. The keyboard controls are a joke, plain and simple. Do not use them. The joystick controls work extremely well in-game, and normally this would be what I'd recommend using. Except that there's a bug with the way joystick values are read and interpreted that shows up on faster machines or with DOSBox cycles set higher than about 35,000, and while this bug has no effect on the gameplay, it causes your selector on the menus to constantly scroll upwards, meaning to actually use the menus you need to hold the joystick position in a very precise spot to keep the selection still. Suffice to say, this is not ideal, especially since the game needs a lot more than 35,000 cycles in some of the more graphically intense areas. Furthermore, the moment you enable joystick support, this bug will forever plague your save file, even if you completely disable joystick support in DOSBox itself, so just don't even try it. That basically leaves us with mouse control, which itself isn't perfect and takes a while to get used to, but actually works well enough. You just gotta remember to set both the center stability zone and style values to 0, otherwise the mouse controls will feel way too jumpy. You'll probably also want to set the race controls to spaceship style, since the default racing controls really don't feel all that natural for a space flying game. Anyways, now that we're past all that, let's talk about the gameplay itself. StarQuest 1 seems to have a lot in common with Line Wars 2, which I reviewed way back in episode 34. You select from a list of missions to play, set your mission options such as your skill level, then play the mission. You also have the option to explore a mission before actually playing it. This way you can get an idea of where everything is and what kind of things you can expect to run into. Exploring is also a good way to see what's coming up later on, since in order to actually play later missions, you need to get your rank up, among other things. When you enter a mission, you first see your ship flying towards its starting location, though you can skip the sequence with the escape key. Once at your starting location, you'll enter the cockpit and be ready to shoot stuff down. The cockpit layout can be a little intimidating at first, but it's actually really straightforward. Going from left to right, we first have the mission timer, showing you how long you've been playing the mission for, and the range radar, which shows you targets all around you from an overhead perspective. And this may seem useless, except that some missions require you to skim the surface of a planet to destroy various installations, so having this radar under those circumstances is very helpful. Next is the speed gauge, which indicates how fast you're going, either as a factor of standard game distance per second, or as a light speed factor from 1 to 4, which I've never been able to figure out the actual speeds of, but light 1 seems to be about 7 times faster than the most powerful sublight speed you can ever attain, and 14 times faster than the engine you start the game with. Light 4 is ridiculously fast and will get you anywhere you could possibly want to go within seconds. Just make sure you don't point yourself directly into the sun. Unlike Line Wars 2, you can indeed crash into the sun in this game. Below both the speed gauge and the shield gauge are a total of 6 tiny indicators. The 2 below the speed gauge are for teleportation and energy recharging, while the 4 below the shield indicator are combat related, indicating damage warnings, when you're getting targeted, when your selected target is in view, and when your selected target is in firing range. The 2 radars in the middle are front and rear aspect, and generally the ones you'll watch when engaging in dogfights with other spaceships. The shield gauge may look like it has forward and rear aspect, but really, your shields run directly off of your energy levels. When you get hit, you lose energy, run out of energy, and you die. Your current energy levels are shown as a multicolored bar between the target information panel, which shows you details about your selected target, and your currently selected weapon. As for actually playing the game, there's very little to it. In fact, despite the massive number of keyboard keys assigned to different functions, you can play this game perfectly fine using nothing more than the number keys to set throttle, T to target whatever's under your reticle, Y to target the closest enemy ship, W to cycle your weapon selection, and finally M to match your current target's speed until either your target changes or you manually select a new throttle setting. One thing you'll notice pretty quickly though is that many of the missions have you perform atmospheric flight, which you can transition to and from simply by getting within range of a planet. Most planets will have a sky color fade in to indicate this, though the transition between atmospheric and space flight is virtually seamless, and it's probably the most interesting feature on display in this game, and one that I kinda wish was more common in games like this. Granted, since the planets themselves have such a low polygon count, the atmospheric sections are usually confined to just a single flat polygon upon which various landscapes and structures have been placed, and the rest of the planet is just one big low-res texture. Still, it's a neat feature. Now, regardless of which mission you take on, short of the race and adventure missions, your primary objective is generally to shoot down anything that shows up red on your radar and targeting display. Though sometimes you'll have to be creative about this, since some missions actually have a limitless number of generic enemies, meaning to clear the mission, you have to destroy other non-generic targets, like convoys and structures. There are some escort objectives sometimes too, and as I've mentioned before, escort missions are the worst, but here in this game, they're not actually that bad. For a very simple reason. The AI is too stupid to care. Now don't get me wrong, the AI actually flies ships fairly well. It points them where they should go, sets an appropriate amount of acceleration. The problem is that the AI just has trouble shooting anything. It's not that it can't hit its target, it just doesn't like firing more than a couple shots before turning around and trying again. Your wingmen, should you get any, are also stupid, so despite the massive number of controls for telling your wingmen what to do, really, you should just ignore them. They're almost completely worthless. In fact, because enemies can't damage you that fast, you're far more likely to die from colliding with multiple enemies in a row. Though collisions with things that aren't targetable like planets does minimal damage. Well, this is because the damage you suffer from a collision is based on the amount of energy that the target has left. And things in this game that aren't targetable simply don't have any energy. Go figure. Once you clear a mission, you get a report screen indicating how many things you destroyed, how many things you protected, and whether you gained any ranks or got any new equipment. Your energy levels and engine can both be upgraded, giving you more damage resistance and greater speed. Plus you can also obtain new weapons. The three basic weapons with limitless ammo, in order of least to most powerful, are laser torpedoes, plasma bombs, and photon torpedoes. There's also electric detonators and antimatter bombs. Electric detonators are essentially powerful pulses of energy which lock onto your currently selected target. You do have unlimited ammo with them, but you can only fire a few of them before more need to be charged up. Antimatter bombs are really powerful, but very slow moving, and you only get 5 of them per mission, so they're pretty much only useful against stationary targets. The only other things left to mention really are the races in the adventure game. Now the races are actually pretty fun, and my favorite aspect of the game. Not to mention they're more scenic than the other missions you can take on. The only catch with the races is that you can cheat by using small bursts of speed from your light drive. But if you want a challenge, set the difficulty high and don't touch your light drive. The opponent racers are balanced extremely well at the highest skill setting, and sometimes I think that this entire game would have been better had they focused on the racing aspect and just left out all the shooting aspects. As for the adventure game, this is just a quirky romp through a star system trying to find the antimatter bombs to equip onto your ship. Basically, all you gotta do to win is fly to a moon, suffer an energy failure, take a job delivering pizzas, which has surprisingly bad collision detection considering the collision detection for every other aspect of the game is polygon perfect, then simply fly all the way to a planet, hover over a white rectangular object to teleport it aboard, and there you go. It's pretty stupid, but at least it changes things up a bit. And yeah, that's all I really got to say about StarQuest 1. It's not a very good game and definitely could have used some more time getting tested and fixed up, but it's an interesting piece of DOS gaming history for sure. If not for the fact that they tried to sell this game as being better than X-Wing and Wing Commander, I wouldn't have been so hard on it. But if I had bought this game back in the day based on all the things touted about it, I would have been majorly disappointed and angry. What it comes down to is that it has some fairly unique aspects and doesn't play all that badly. It just has many issues and it's not really something I'd recommend someone go out of their way to add to their collection. As for DOSBox settings, the auto and max cycle settings do work but love to cause the frame rate to skip, which is hilarious when you consider the frame rate is locked at about 15 frames a second to begin with. So really, a fixed cycles count works best. 35,000 is the highest you can set it while still being able to use the joystick support, but many sections of the game do not run very well with this low a cycle setting. So instead, I recommend going with mouse control and setting the cycles to 80,000. This will cause some skipping and slowdown of the music in certain menus, but really, it's a small price to pay. And that's actually all you need to worry about as far as DOSBox settings are concerned. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Kinda surprised that half the guesses this week were right, so for next week's game, I'm gonna have to go even more obscure. I'm gonna be taking a look at a dungeon crawl with one of the most difficult to pronounce names that I've ever seen. Now, if you think you know which game that is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to check it out.